advocate, you may be seated.
May I inquire, Your Honor?
Right.
Good morning, Mr. Frey.
Good morning.
What do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a private consultant, a private therapist. I have expertise in human trafficking, and I'm often contracted by the San Antonio Police Department for working interviewing victims and witnesses of violent crime.
Could you please inform the court of your education?
I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, master's degree in social work, and I've also completed my residency hours at the California University Medical Center, where I often counsel trafficking victims.
What is your role in today's case?
I was hired by the defense to reevaluate Dana Greyjoy's findings from the case files, as well as to see if Lynn Stark showed any indicators of a victim of human trafficking.
And how did you prepare for this case?
I interviewed both Ms. Stark and Ms. Aubrey after Ms. Aubrey's arrest, as well as looking over all the relevant information in the witness statements, and I examined Ms. Stark's apartment.
How do you determine whether someone is a victim of human trafficking?
Well, there are three major indicators, including human traffickers' targets, wages, and exploitation.
Now you mentioned human trafficking targets. Could you please elaborate?
Well, human traffickers usually target multiple unskilled workers for working menial jobs, and they're often subjected to inhumane working and living conditions due to deception or threats of violence.
And how does this apply to Lynn's situation?
Well, Karen Aubrey was looking for a skilled worker retiring Lynn, not directly an immigrant. And Ms. Stark's apartment was Spartan, but it was habitable, and she had access to the outside world.
Now moving further, you mentioned wages. Could you please elaborate?
Human trafficking victims are often paid pennies per hour or nothing at all.
And how does this apply to Lynn's situation?
Ms. Stark was a salaried employee, and she was paid every single month consistently.
Now finally, you mentioned exploitation. Could you please explain?
Human traffickers often exploit their targets with the excuse that they need to pay their debts.
And how is this relevant to Lynn's situation?
This does not directly relate to Cameron and Lynn's relationship.
Now, were there any other factors you considered in your analysis?
Yes, Ms. Aubrey's actions did not reflect those of a human trafficker. For example, Ms. Aubrey and Ms. Stark had a legitimate employee relationship where they worked together on a daily basis, sharing a similar workload.
Now turning to your interview with Lynn, did she mention anything about her physical or emotional health?
She claims she suffered from a number of negative symptoms that affected her physical and emotional health.
As a professional, what did you make of this claim?
In my professional opinion, Ms. Stark did suffer from anxiety, depression, and chronic physical pain, but these were more to do with the work at the restaurant rather than the working conditions.
What do you mean?
Objection, Your Honor. Improper expert opinion as to Lynn Stark's mental state.
Which way?
Your Honor, Lynn Stark's mental state is highly relevant at this time, as it would form the basis of her whole being of whether or not she is being human trafficked.
So read.
Your Honor, to accurately diagnose any type of mental health issue requires a specific evaluation and tools to do so. This witness only conducted a simple interview and therefore cannot testify to her mental state or the reasons for it.
The question as framed went beyond the expertise of this witness relating to the conditions of human trafficking. The objection is sustained. You may restate or rephrase the question.
Excuse me, Your Honor. Move to strike the testimony about Ms. Stark's mental state.
That testimony is stricken. Ms. Wang.
Now, during your interview, you stated that Lynn suffered from emotional effects, correct?
Yes.
And what did you make of this analysis?
Well, I believe that they were more to do with the work at the restaurant rather than working conditions.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper expert opinion as to Lynn Stark's mental state once again, or the factors that had to do with it.
Ms. Wang.
Your Honor, the expert is merely stating as to what he has observed in his interview with Lynn Stark. Furthermore, he is a psychologist. He has a degree in psychology, so he is well aware of how the individual mind works.
The objection to the question is rephrased as overruled. The question will stand.
Now, what do you mean by this?
Well, Ms. Stark had no professional experience in the restaurant business, so she was bound to suffer an enormous amount of stress brought on by the fast-paced nature of the restaurant.
Now, you read Dana Greyjoy's witness statement, true?
I did.
Do you agree with her opinion that Lynn's lack of familiarity with American culture made her more susceptible to exploitation?
No, I do not.
Why not?
Well, Miss Stark was an educated worker, and she knew from the start that Cameron didn't know how much she could pay Lynn. And while I don't agree that Miss Stark's lack of familiarity with American culture made her more susceptible to exploitation, I do believe it may have contributed to her struggle in the workplace.
What do you mean?
Well, it may have caused Miss Stark to misinterpret Cameron's feedback as yelling and threats to Lynn's job. This would have caused Miss Stark to mistakenly believe that Miss Aubrey was acting as a slave driver rather than just a normal employer.
Now, based on your definition of human trafficking, have you formed an opinion as to whether or not Lynn Stark is a victim of human trafficking?
I have.
What is it?
In my professional opinion, Miss Stark's ailments are much more consistent with overworked employees rather than a victim of human trafficking.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Mr. Rodriguez, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good morning, Mr. Frey.
Good morning, Miss Rodriguez.
Now, Mr. Frey, you were hired by the defense, correct?
Yes, I was.
And the defense paid you to reevaluate Ms. Greyjoy's findings, true?
Yes, it was my job.
Now, it is your testimony that Ms. Stark was paid more than the average human trafficking victim, correct?
Yes, it was.
However, being paid more than the average human trafficking victim does not make Ms. Stark immune from being trafficked, correct?
No, but in this case it does.
I'm sorry, Mr. Frey, I don't think you understand my question. I simply asked whether or not being paid more than the average human trafficking victim made her immune. My question simply required a yes or no. If you could answer with one of those.
No, for most cases, no.
And you have also testified that Ms. Stark's education is also unlike most human trafficking victims, true?
Yes, it was.
But Ms. Stark's education also does not make her immune from being trafficked, correct?
Again, for most cases, it's not.
Now, you have also testified that you had never seen a victim with such adequate living quarters, true?
Yes.
But your personal experience doesn't mean that every human trafficking case has uninhabitable living quarters, true?
No, but for this case, it did mean that that Ms. Stark was not.
Objection, Your Honor. The witness is being non-responsive. Move to strike everything after no.
Everything up to no is stricken as non-responsive.
Now, Mr. Frey, you're aware of Ms. Greyjoy's report in this case, correct?
Yes, I am.
And in her report, you read that Ms. Stark was vulnerable and desperate, correct?
Yes, that is what she stated.
And you also read that Ms. Stark worked 90 hours per week, true?
Yes.
And you also read that Ms. Stark's pay was extremely low compared to minimum wage.
Compared to minimum wage, yes.
In addition, you also read that the defendant was in possession of Ms. Stark's legal documents, true?
For a good reason, yes.
Objection, Your Honor. The witness is being non-responsive. Move to strike everything before yes.
Everything before yes is stricken as non-responsive.
Now, Mr. Frey, despite all of these factors, it is your testimony that Ms. Stark is not a victim of human trafficking, correct?
Yes, for many different reasons.
Now, Mr. Frey, 2 weeks after the defendant's arrest, you interviewed the defendant, true?
That's true.
And then another 2 weeks after that, you interviewed Lynn Stark, correct?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Frey, just to clarify, you didn't interview Lynn Stark until after you had interviewed Cameron Aubrey, yes or no?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Sustained.
Maybe you heard, Your Honor?
Yes.
This question is just for clarification purposes.
Since the previous answer was clear, no clarification would be required. It would be duplicated. You may proceed.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Ms. White, any re-examination?
Yes, briefly. Now, in cross-examination, you were asked about Cameron being in possession of Lynn's government documents. Why is that?
Well, it was for a good reason. Miss Aubrey was trying to sponsor Lynn's visa.
On cross-examination, you were also asked about Dana Greyjoy's opinion. Do you agree with her opinion?
No, I do not.
Why not?
Well, Dana Greyjoy looked at many different factors and made correlations between them, but correlation does not equal causation.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you, sir. You may stand up.
The defense calls Devin Tyler to the witness stand.
Thank you.
Devin Tyler, please follow me.
The defense would also like to request a time check as to how much time is remaining for direct examination.
defense has 9 minutes, 27 seconds remaining on duress.
Thank you.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of competition?
I do.
State your name, state your last for the record.
Devin Tyler, Tyler.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. You may proceed.
Good evening, Ms. Tyler.
Good morning.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a hotel manager in Sanibel.
Do you know Cameron Aubrey?
Yes, I do.
How do you know Cameron Aubrey?
Cameron is my dear cousin. Recently, I helped her with the opening of a restaurant, A Taste of Tempera. I often visited.
During what months did you visit?
I began visiting before the restaurant opened in November 2015 up until March 2016.
And how were you involved in the restaurant?
I gave Cameron advice on the planning and helped her find a consultant.
What kind of advice did you give Cameron?
I advised Cameron to place an advertisement in the Little Tantera newspaper to help her find a head chef, which she did.
Now, do you know Julian Blake?
Yes, I do.
How do you know Julian Blake?
Julian was an old acquaintance of Cameron and I's. Later, Julian was hired to be Cameron's restaurant consultant.
Did you ever observe Cameron and Julian working together?
Yes, I did.
What observations, if any, did you make of their working interactions?
Well, it wasn't what I had hoped. Julian was far too opinionated and would push Cameron to doing what he wanted.
Now, I'd like to ask you a few questions about Lynn Stark. Do you know Lynn Stark?
Yes, I do.
How do you know Lynn Stark?
Lynn was Cameron's head chef.
When did you meet Lynn Stark?
I met Lynn in November while I was at the restaurant with Cameron.
And did you ever observe Cameron and Lynn working together?
Yes, I did.
What observations, if any, did you make of their working relationship?
Cameron and Lynn worked well together in November. You could tell just how much Cameron cared for Lynn. Unfortunately, that did change after the restaurant opened.
What kind of change occurred?
After the restaurant opened, I noticed Lynn would have trouble keeping up with all the dishes, and whenever Cameron would offer Lynn advice, Lynn would ignore it.
And how do you know Cameron cared so much about Lynn?
Well, when Cameron first hired Lynn, she told me about how much she loved hearing about Lynn's family, and she truly wanted to help Lynn because Lynn was a person in need.
Now, I'd like to ask you a few final questions. Did Cameron ever approach you with questions concerning Lynn's immigration documents?
Yes, she did.
What were these questions?
Cameron had questions about the paperwork necessary to bring Lynn's family over to the U.S.
How did you respond?
I advised Cameron to contact an immigration attorney to discuss it with them.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Ms. Rodriguez, questions at Lane?
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, Your Honor, may I inquire as to the time remaining for cross-examination?
The prosecution has 7 minutes and 57 seconds remaining on cross.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good morning, Ms. Tyler.
Good morning, Ms. Rodriguez.
Now, Ms. Tyler, in the month before the restaurant opened, you were impressed by how well the defendant and Ms. Stark worked together, correct?
Yes, I was.
However, once the restaurant opened, you saw that the defendant's relationship with Ms. Stark became strained, true?
Yes.
Now, isn't it also true that Julian Blake criticized how the defendant treated Ms. Stark?
I think I heard that once.
But you did hear this, though, correct?
I cannot say whether it is true, but yes, I heard him say that.
Object, Your Honor, the witness is being non-responsive. Move to strike everything before yes.
Based on the questions framed, overruled.
Now I'd like to move on to the beginning of the restaurant. When the defendant told you that she wanted to open a restaurant, you advised that she hired Julian Blake as a consultant, correct?
An error in judgment on my part, I'm afraid, but yes, I did.
And this was because you knew the defendant had absolutely no experience in running a restaurant, true?
Yes.
But Julian Blake had this experience, correct?
Yes.
However, the defendant did not follow all of Mr. Blake's advice, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Now, Ms. Tyler, I would like to move on to the topic of Ms. Stark's legal documents. The defendant spoke to you about Ms. Stark's visa, true?
Yes, she did.
And you advised her to find an immigration attorney about this visa, correct?
Yes.
But Ms. Tyler, to your knowledge, did the defendant ever contact an immigration attorney, yes or no?
To my knowledge, she never did.
And you know the defendant was willing to do whatever it took to become the best possible restaurant owner, yes or no?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Ms. Rodriguez?
This is directly stated in Ms. Tyler's witness statement.
Mr. Summers?
The people have not yet laid proper foundation as to how she knew exactly that Cameron would do anything, which constitutes many things.
Based on the factual record, the objection to overrule.
Yes, Your Honor.
Question will stand.
Were you finished answering?
No, please repeat the question, okay?
Yes. You know the defendant was willing to do whatever it took to be the best possible restaurant owner, yes or no?
Yes, she was a very hard worker.
Thank you, Ms. Tyler. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Summers, re-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. No, Ms. Tyler, on cross-examination, you were asked if Cameron would do anything in order to succeed. Do you know if this would entail harming others?
Objection, Your Honor. Leading.
No, overrule. You may answer.
Of course it would. Cameron's one of the gentlest people I know. She'd never intentionally harm someone.
And on cross-examination, you were also asked about Cameron's compliance with Julian Blake's advice. Do you know why Cameron didn't comply with Julian Blake's advice all the time?
Well, as I stated, sometimes Julian was far too lenient. His advice sometimes seemed to benefit him more than the
Objection, Your
restaurant.
Honor. In proper opinion.
Why?
Excuse me, Your Honor. The defendant was not, Ms. Tyler was not a restaurant consultant, therefore she could not accurately know if Julian was simply being pushy or if he was trying to do his job.
The question is fair re-examination invited across the objections overruled.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
So, do you know why Cameron did not always comply with Julian Blake's advice?
Well, as I stated, Julian was far too lenient. Sometimes his advice seemed to benefit him rather than the restaurant.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Ms. Wayne, you have the next witness?
Yes, the defense calls Frankie Lyman to the stand. Frankie Lyman, please follow me. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the long-term competition? I do. State your name and I will ask for the record. Frankie Lyman, Lyman. Thank you. You may be seated.
May I inquire?
You may.
Good morning, Miss Lyman.
Good morning.
How old are you?
I'm 19 years old.
Do you currently attend school?
Yes, I'm currently a proud student of Santabella Community College. Go Mustangs.
And have you held any jobs while attending college?
Yes, I'm currently working at my campus bookstore, but prior to that, I was working part-time at a Taste of Tantera until it had closed.
How did you obtain this job at Taste of Tantera?
I saw a posting on my college campus, responded, and was offered part-time starting November 2nd, 2015.
Do you know the defendant, Cameron Aubrey?
Yes, she was my boss.
What kind of a boss was Miss Aubrey?
In general, she was a strict but fair boss. She might have yelled at me whenever I made a mistake, and trust me, there was a lot in the beginning, but I never took it personally.
And do you know Lynn Stark?
Yes.
How?
We often worked together in the restaurant and got to know each other pretty well when business was slow.
Did you ever see Lynn leave Taste of Tantera?
Yes, several times. I helped her transfer money back to her home because Cameron had her ID for employment purposes.
Did you ever witness any interactions between Cameron and Lynn?
Yes, they were often working together while I was also working at the restaurant.
Based on your observations, what was their relationship like?
Cameron seemed to especially care about Lynn, treating her like a family member.
What do you mean?
Well, Cameron had allowed Lynn to live in a comfortable apartment, and she was allowed to eat as much food as she wanted. As a college student, I would love to have something like that.
Now, what was Lynn like after the restaurant opened?
Well, after the restaurant had opened, Lynn became flustered, sometimes struggling to keep up with all the orders. And this frustrated Cameron as she wanted all the customers to be served in a timely manner.
And what was Cameron like after the restaurant opened?
As the restaurant gained more customers, Cameron became more stressed, sometimes snapping at employees, yelling, maybe even slamming doors.
Now, overall, based on your interactions with the defendant, what is your opinion of her character?
Although Cameron could be a tough boss, at the end of the day, she was always extremely hardworking and very caring towards all of her employees.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Reagan. Your Honor.
The court forgive me, I inquire for the time remaining.
Prosecution has 6 minutes and 12 seconds remaining on cross.
And the defense would also like to inquire as to how much time is remaining for direct examination.
Defense has 4 minutes and 40 seconds remaining on direct.
Thank you.
And then
You may.
Good morning, Ms. Lyman.
Good morning.
Now, you are a part-time employee at Taste of Canada, correct?
Yes, I was.
And you had 2 identified shifts, right?
Yes.
The morning and evening.
Yes.
And whenever you worked the morning shift, Lynn Stark was there working, yes or no, please?
Yes, she was.
And whenever you worked the evening shift, Ms. Stark was still there working, yes or no, please?
Yes, she was.
Now, when you were there, you noticed that the defendant often harshly criticized Ms. Stark if she did anything just a little bit wrong, yes or no, please?
Yes.
Now, taking you to the night of March 9th, you saw the defendant coming out the stairwell from Ms. Stark's apartment, right?
Yes, I witnessed this.
And the defendant told you why she was in Ms. Stark's private space, did she?
Yes, she was going to fix the leaky faucet.
And that's what you told Ms. Stark later, right?
Yes.
But you didn't see any tools in the defendant's hands at the time, did you?
I haven't noticed anything.
Nothing at all?
No.
Thank you, Ms. Lyman. No further questions, Your Honor.
Any re-examination?
No, Your Honor, that won't be necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Lyman. You may stand up. Ms. Reagan.
The defendant would like to call Cameron Aubrey to the stand.
Cameron Aubrey, please follow me. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
State your names for the night, last for the record.
Cameron Aubrey, A-W-B-R-E-Y.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Your Honor, may I inquire?
You may proceed.
Good morning, Ms. Aubrey.
Good morning, Ms. Renberg.
Will you please tell the court a little bit about your recent professional experience?
Of course, I recently left my job as a security guard in the garment industry in order to pursue my dream of opening a Tantaran restaurant with $100,000 I inherited from my aunt.
At the time you decided to pursue your dream of opening a Tantaran restaurant, what, if any, experience did you have in the restaurant industry?
Well, truthfully, none. I had absolutely no idea how to start a restaurant, but I was sure I could make it work.
Without any prior experience in the restaurant industry, how did you manage to start your own restaurant?
I asked my cousin, Devin Tyler, for help, and she did what she could, but eventually suggested I hire Julian Blake, and so I did.
What was the relationship between you and Julian Blake like?
To be honest, it wasn't always a good relationship. We often argued because he would frequently criticize my opinions.
Were you and Julian ever able to resolve this conflict?
Well, eventually, I just had to make it clear that if Julian had a problem with the way I run my business, he was free to leave. Julian then resigned.
Now, Miss Aubrey, do you know Lynn Stark?
Yes, I did.
How do you know Miss Stark?
Lynn responded to an ad I placed in the paper for a chef of new Tantaran cuisine, and I eventually hired her for the position.
Why did you hire Lynn for the job?
Well, despite the fact that Lynn had no professional cooking experience, her food was delicious and authentic.
With Lynn's lack of professional cooking experience, how did she perform in the intense restaurant environment?
She wasn't able to cook, but often struggled in the restaurant.
How so?
She just often worked very slowly, especially during lunch rush, so always had to go back to the kitchen to remind her just to work a little bit faster.
And Miss Aubrey, before hiring Lynn Stark, did you discuss pay with her?
Yes.
What did you say?
I warned Lynn that I was on a tight budget and couldn't guarantee how much I could afford to pay her. Regardless, she accepted the job.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay as to the statement made by the defendant.
Ms. Reagan.
Your Honor, this falls under the state of mind exception to the hearsay rule, as it demonstrates Miss Aubrey's then existing state of mind upon hiring Lynn Stark, which is highly relevant in this case as it directly pertains to the second element of human trafficking.
Mr. Marsh?
I made no argument as to the relevance of this testimony. However, it is hearsay because the statement made about her not knowing how much you could pay Lynn and her telling Lynn that, this is hearsay because it is going to the truth of the statement.
Is it the defendant's own statement that you are challenging as hearsay?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Radcliffe?
Again, Your Honor, this goes to demonstrate the defendant's state of mind at the time of hiring Lynn Stark.
Mr. Marsh, one last round.
It is being offered for the truth of the matter because she told Lynn Stark that she would not know. This is an important fact in the case whether or not Lynn Stark may or may not have known this.
Since it does go to one of the elements of the charges, the defendant's mental state being very much an issue with respect to the charges, the objections are overruled, question will stand.
And Miss Aubrey, what, if anything, other than pay, did you provide Lynn for her services at Taste of Tantera?
I supplied Lynn with housing, food, toiletries, allowed her to call the family back from the Tantera on my office phone.
Did you offer Lynn anything else for her services?
Yes.
What else did you offer her?
I also offered to help bring her family here to the U.S., but I never made any promises.
Now, Miss Aubrey, you mentioned housing. Did Lynn ever complain about this housing?
Not that I can recall, but she did mention leaky faucet.
Did you ever check on this leaky faucet?
Yes.
When?
March 9th. I went to Lynn's apartment to check on the leaky faucet she had told me about back in December.
And do you recall seeing Lynn that night?
Yes.
What happened?
She asked me for a vacation, but didn't say why.
And how did you respond?
I was frustrated by the events of the recent days and knew there was no way the restaurant could afford to go without its head chef, so I had to deny Lynn's request.
How did Lynn react to the denial of her request?
She became extremely angry and started yelling at me. It was startling.
Next, what, if anything, happened?
She just turned and walked away up the stairs. I was so upset and exhausted that I angrily slammed the door behind her.
Moving to the morning of March 10th, how did it begin for you, Miss Aubrey?
At about 7 a.m. I heard a banging on the stairwell door, so I opened it and found Lynn standing there. Apparently she lost her key, but I had no knowledge of that.
Your Honor, you mentioned a key, but why would Lynn need a key?
The door to the hallway contains a self-locking double-cylinder deadbolt.
Your Honor, may the witness have permission to approach Exhibit A?
Yes.
Miss Aubrey, will you please identify where this doorway is located?
The door is situated right here, at the end of the stairwell, connecting the apartment to the restaurant.
Your Honor, let the record reflect, the witness has just identified the portion of the diagram at the end of the stairwell containing the door symbol.
Record will so reflect.
Thank you, Miss Aubrey. You may return to your seat. Moving back to March 10th, what, if anything, occurred later that day?
Officer West arrived with the search warrant.
Did Officer West find anything, if you know?
Yes.
How do you know?
Well,
30 seconds.
after searching the office, he asked me where I had Lynn's visa and passport.
Why did you have Lynn's visa and passport?
I was just told the honors him to fill out the paperwork so I can try and bring her family here to the U.S.
And Miss Aubrey?
So she asked.
Excuse me. Miss Aubrey, the people are alleging that you were detained or confining Lynn to her apartment without her consent. Is this true?
Of course not. I gave Lynn access to a key she could leave any time.
Miss Aubrey, the people are also alleging that you were depriving or violating Lynn's personal liberty by forcing her to work for you against her will. Is this true?
No, not at all.
Time.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Mr. Bunch.
Yes, Your Honor. May I inquire as to the time remaining?
Prosecution has 5 minutes and 3 seconds remaining on the cross.
Thank you. May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good morning, Miss Aubrey.
Good morning, Mr. Munch.
When you planned to open Taste of Tantera, you posted an advertisement in Little Tantera, is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
And as a result of this advertisement, you hired Lynn Stark, correct?
Yes.
And you were aware that Lynn Stark was an unemployed immigrant from Tantera, correct?
Yes.
Now, while Lynn Stark worked at the restaurant, you demanded a lot of work from her, is that correct?
Yes, as stated in the ad, and she would be the head chef, so that, yes.
And you sometimes snapped at her, correct?
Occasionally, yes.
You sometimes got in her face, correct?
Yes.
And when talking to her, you sometimes got physically close to her, correct?
I suppose so, yes.
Now, you also had problems with your consultant, Julian Blake, is that correct?
Yes.
And Julian Blake informed you that you were overworking Miss Stark, is that correct?
Yes.
And when he did, you became furious with him, correct?
He made many opinions, and this was just another one.
Is that a
Yes.
yes? Thank you. In fact, you told him that he was free to leave, correct?
Yes, I have no desire to work with someone who criticized my every move.
But did you ever tell Lynn Stark explicitly that she was free to leave the restaurant? Yes or no?
Well, no.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Stark at times approached you with problems she had with her employment, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
She approached you with problems she had with her employment, such as hours and pay.
Occasionally.
So she talked to you about her hours, that's correct?
Yes.
But you never decreased her hours, yes or no?
No, we both
Thank you.
headshot.
And she talked to you about her pay, is that correct?
Yes.
But you never increased her pay, yes or no?
It was all I could afford, so no.
Now, on March 2nd, you got in an argument with a police officer, is that correct?
Unfortunately, yes.
And after the argument, you said to the officer, I don't know who you think you are, but you need to understand something. Everything under this roof is mine. Is that what you said?
Everything, yes.
Now, moving to March 9th, you entered Ms. Stark's apartment that day, is that correct?
Yes, to check on the Boston.
And do you remember any other time besides that day entering her apartment?
Not besides when I first showed her the room.
Now, later that same day, Ms. Stark approached you with a request to leave the restaurant, is that correct?
Yes.
But you refused to grant this request, correct?
Without any reason of why, or without asking for documents back, I couldn't.
I don't think you understood my question. I asked you, did you deny this request?
Yes, I had to deny the request.
Now, after the ensuing argument, Ms. Stark walked through the stairwell door and up to her apartment, is that correct?
Yeah.
And as she did that, you then slammed the self-locking door on her, is that correct?
Regrettably, yes.
Now, you were aware at the time that the door locked on its own, correct?
Yes, but I was also aware that she had a key.
But that wasn't my question. You were aware that the door locked, yes or no?
Yes.
And you didn't slam it on accident, did you?
No.
And as you slammed the self-locking door, you said to Ms. Stark that she needed to get comfortable there and no one was going to take a vacation, correct?
No, I said that we need to get comfortable here.
All right. Now, the next day, March 10th, you did not release Ms. Stark immediately when you arrived at the restaurant. Yes or no, please?
No, right after
Thank you.
leaving.
And later that day, March 10th, Officer West came to your restaurant. Is that correct?
Yes.
And later, the officer returned with a search warrant for the restaurant.
Yes.
And in your office, Officer West found Lynn Stark's visa and passport. Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Aubrey. No further questions, Your Honor.
The defense being out of time, the defendant, the witness is excused. Thank you. Mr. Lynch, you may present the prosecution closing argument.
Yes, Your Honor. May I again inquire as to the time remaining?
Prosecution has 5 minutes and 48 seconds remaining on closing.
Thank you. May I proceed?
You may.
In this case, we have 2 charges: human trafficking and false imprisonment. As in any criminal trial, these 2 charges must be proven following a specific set of instructions, a specific recipe. And despite what the defense may say, we have the recipe. We have the ingredients. We have the facts in this case, Your Honor. And the facts in this case prove that the defendant, Cameron Aubrey, is guilty of human trafficking and false imprisonment. Beginning with human trafficking. The first element of human trafficking requires that the defendant deprive someone of their personal liberty through fear, fraud, or duress. In this case, all 3 of those are present. During Lynn Stark's employment at Taste of Tantera, the defendant would often yell at Ms. Stark. She would get up close with her. She would threaten to fire her. Based on these actions and statements by the defendant, whether she meant them to be intimidating or not, Ms. Stark did fear the defendant. Also, at the beginning of Ms. Stark's employment, she was told that she would be working a full-time job. Now, a full-time job, Your Honor, means 40-hour work weeks. But that is not what Ms. Stark got from this job. She got 90-hour work weeks with a fraction of minimum wage. She was also told that the defendant would do what she could to bring her family to the United States. But none of these things were realized. The defendant never brought Lynn Stark's family to the United States. She did not supply her with the job that was advertised. And because of this, Lynn Stark was deceived by the defendant. Also, there is evidence that Lynn Stark was under duress from the defendant. When Lynn Stark was hired, the defendant took Ms. Stark's visa and passport and refused to return them when asked. This means that the defendant had control over Ms. Stark for the entirety of her employment at Taste of Tantera. Therefore, Lynn Stark feared the defendant, was deceived by the defendant, and was under duress from the defendant. This satisfies that the defendant deprived Lynn Stark of her personal liberty. Moving on to the second element of human trafficking. It requires that the defendant intended to obtain forced labor from someone. In this case, it was Ms. Stark. It's very simple that she wanted forced labor. She worked, Lynn Stark, from dawn to dusk every day for about 4 months. Also, when hiring a chef for Taste of Tantera, she said to Julian Blake that she knew that a lot could be gotten out of foreign workers for very little. This was implying that she could hire a foreign worker and abuse them. Also, she stated to Officer West, when Officer West confronted her with the truth about her treatment of Ms. Stark, she stated to the officer that everything under the roof of Taste of Tantera was hers. This was talking about Ms. Stark. Moving on to false imprisonment. It requires that the defendant confine someone against their will. And on the night of March 9th, after an argument with the defendant, Ms. Stark walked through the self-locking door, which the defendant then slammed on her. Not on accident, on purpose. And this act very clearly confined Ms. Stark to her room. And without a key, Ms. Stark had no way of getting out. Finally, we come to the second element of false imprisonment. This element requires that the defendant's act forced Ms. Stark to remain in her room. Now, it is rumored that Ms. Stark still had the key, but she did not. The defendant took this key. Ms. Stark did not take this key because she was downstairs working in the restaurant. The defendant took Ms. Stark's key while she was gone, the only time that she ever went into Ms. Stark's apartment. This means that her act left Ms. Stark without a key and without a way to leave her apartment. So there you have it. The people successfully brought to the table every element, every ingredient of human trafficking and false imprisonment. We have proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Ms. Aubrey is guilty of both charges. And the defense may point to the defendant's character in this case. But if we have satisfied the ingredients, the facts for human trafficking and false imprisonment, that is enough. And therefore, the people respectfully request a verdict of guilty on both counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Ms. Redberg.
May I proceed?
You may.
The United States of America, a place of promise and opportunity, with a mix of ambition and capitalist competition. A cultural melting pot of people pursuing the American dream. A curious yet congruous amalgam. But as we all may know, Some recipes work, while others are destined to fail. And placing Lynn Stark, an anxiety-ridden, desperate, and inexperienced immigrant in a fast-paced restaurant environment was a recipe for disaster. A disaster that now causes Cameron Aubrey to sit here wrongfully accused of crimes pertaining to Lynn. But as the evidence demonstrated today, the only thing my client is guilty of is providing the ill-equipped Lynn Stark with an opportunity to pursue the American dream. Your Honor, the prosecution charged my client with both human trafficking and false imprisonment. They must prove both of these charges to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to explain to you how the prosecution has come far from meeting this heavy burden of proof. Turning to human trafficking, the first element is defined as substantial and sustained restriction of a person's liberty through means such as fear, coercion, and duress. According to CalCrim 1243, all circumstances, in determining this, all circumstances are relevant. So, let's look at those circumstances. Cameron Aubrey placed an advertisement looking for a chef who must be willing and able to work hard in a fast-paced environment. Your Honor, Lynn Stark saw this ad and willingly accepted a stressful job. While the pay was not high, Cameron had disclosed to Lynn that she was unaware how much she could afford to pay her. In addition, tonight we heard that Cameron provided Lynn with housing, toiletries, and food. Sure, the apartment was not the Ritz-Carlton, but as Frankie Lyman testified, it seemed comfortable. Frankie Lyman also testified that Cameron treated Lynn more like a family member than an employee. Furthermore, today we heard that Lynn had access to a key to the stairwell door. So, Lynn, if she wanted to go out at night, could have easily done so. Why didn't she? Well, I was standing right about here when Miss Stark provided the answer to that question on cross-examination. There was nowhere to go in that isolated neighborhood. Therefore, Your Honor, any decision to stay in the apartment was a choice made by Lynn herself. Today, we also heard testimony from Addison Frey about how Lynn's ailments were not consistent with those of a human trafficking victim. Now, as Mr. Santos, my colleague, mentioned at the beginning of this trial, the prosecution has attempted to sway you to accept that Lynn's ailments were a product of the working conditions at Taste of Tantera. However, tonight, Ms. Stark herself admitted that her family back in Tantera added to her stress. And while Dana Greyjoy, the prosecution expert, opined that Lynn did fit the profile of a human trafficking victim, Dana Greyjoy did not give many relevant factors the same weight as others. Furthermore, Addison Frey provided testimony about how Cameron's attitude did not reflect that of a human trafficker, whereas Dana Greyjoy provided no evidence, no testimony about Cameron's attitude because Greyjoy did not even interview Cameron Aubrey. Although Mr. Frey's conclusions are far more reliable, Your Honor, the very fact that these two experts have differing conclusions alone creates reasonable doubt. In any event, the prosecution has not proven the first element of human trafficking beyond a reasonable doubt, and thus my client must be found not guilty of human trafficking. But let's look at the second element, which provides when the defendant acted, she intended to obtain or maintain forced labor or services through means such as fraud, coercion, duress, or equivalent conduct that would reasonably overbear the will of a person. As Mr. Santos told you to look out for in the beginning of this trial, the prosecution's argument lacks evidence regarding Cameron's intent, and to support this element, the prosecution heavily relies on Cameron's actions with regard to Lynn's passport. However, tonight we heard Cameron Aubrey herself testify that she would have given Lynn her documents back if she would have simply asked for them, and that she had Lynn's passport to sponsor her visa. In addition, Devin Tyler testified that Cameron asked Devin a few times about how to handle this visa. With the busyness of the restaurant, Cameron did not accomplish this yet, but Officer West testified to finding these documents lying in a file folder right on top of Cameron's desk, in an office that was in close proximity to where Lynn worked many hours a day. In fact, Lynn was allowed to go in this office to call her family back in Tantera. If the defendant was really trying to keep these documents from Lynn, would she have them sitting right on top of her desk where Lynn might happen to stumble across them? Moreover, the prosecution's argument can be traced to the biased testimony of Julian Blake. And Officer West, who had taken a training course on human trafficking and observed Cameron and Lynn interact on many occasions, did not open a formal investigation until after the bitter Julian Blake eventually went to the police station. Moving further, the prosecution charged my client with false imprisonment, which entails that when the the defendant intentionally and unlawfully restrained, detained, or confined a person. However, it is undisputed that Lynn had an access to a key to the stairwell door. So, this whole charge comes down to one night, March 9th. Admittedly, Cameron shut the stairwell door because she was exhausted and upset, but Cameron knew Lynn had a key. Now, the prosecution desperately and speculatively contends that Cameron stole Lynn's key.
30 seconds.
But here's the problem. The prosecution's uncorroborated theory is that Cameron stole Lynn's key before Lynn made her vacation request. Cameron didn't know she was going to get into an argument with Lynn later that night. So the people actually want this court to believe that Cameron could see into the future. That, Your Honor, defies reality. My client, Cameron Aubrey, is not guilty of human trafficking or false imprisonment. For all these reasons, Your Honor, the defense respectfully asks that you find Cameron Aubrey not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rutherford. 1 minute for rebuttal.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, the defense has implied that because Ms. Stark's documents were in the office in close proximity to Lynn Stark's working place, that Lynn Stark might have had access to them. But in this case, Your Honor, Lynn Stark is not the criminal. She would not steal something that someone else possessed. The criminal in this case is the defendant. And the defendant had a recipe for disaster in this case, not Lynn Stark. Lynn Stark wasn't a part of that recipe until the defendant made Lynn Stark a part of that recipe. Whether it was Lynn Stark or someone else, a hard worker or not, an inexperienced chef or an immigrant, human trafficking and false imprisonment are inherently recipes for disaster. And due to the actions of the defendant, the people again respectfully request 2 verdicts of guilty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Rutherford, 1 minute for rebuttal.
Yes, Your Honor.
The availability of Lynn's documents to her is not the point that the defense is focusing on. The point the defense is focusing on is Cameron's intent. If Cameron intended to confiscate these documents from Lynn, she would not have them lying conspicuously right on top of her desk in an office that Lynn would be allowed to go into. And also, previously articulated by the defense is the lack of intent, the lack of Cameron's intent.
30 seconds.
Throughout this trial, we heard evidence of Cameron yelling at employees. But, Your Honor, if Cameron's actions in yelling at employees can be deemed as human trafficking, then employers all across this country would be guilty of human trafficking, Your Honor. Moreover, for every piece of evidence the prosecution has brought up tonight, there's more than one reasonable interpretation, one pointing to guilt and one pointing to innocence. According to Calcrim 224, if there are more than one reasonable interpretations to a piece of evidence, this court must accept the one pointing to innocence.
That concludes the evidence as well as the arguments. The parties have 30 seconds if they wish to use them to confer regarding any rules violations. Has he decided to take their opportunity?
None of the defense, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
The court will proceed then to verdict in this case. The verdict is not a reflection on the quality of the presentations. I am going to say a little less than I've typically done in earlier rounds because there is another round in this case. So I will restrict myself to the following remarks as part of my verdict. There are 2 charges in this case, the human trafficking and the false imprisonment. On the human trafficking, regrettably, what the prosecution has been able to show is another bad boss, but not a person guilty of criminal conduct. I cannot find in a case where the victim had the freedom of movement, freedom of access that she did, money, place to live, and unrestricted ability to leave as she wanted to, that this is a case involving human trafficking. On count 1, therefore, the prosecution has failed to discharge its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. On count 2, which is the false imprisonment charge, it is a closer call But again, the prosecution has the high burden of establishing the elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Suspicion is not enough. A sense of what happened is not enough. It is a tough standard. The defense in this case isolated a fact which, on the facts, ultimately for me is determinative in this case, and that is that on everything presented, the defendant would expect that there was a key available to the victim, and the door slamming is consistent with simply a punctuation to the end of the argument as opposed to an effort to lock somebody in if there was a key accessible. The only further information about the key is an incident happening earlier that day, and as the defense argued in this case, the defendant would have been clairvoyant to know earlier in the day that it was time to steal the key, because later in the day the victim would ask for permission to visit her sister. Those dots do not connect, and under the circumstances I must conclude that there is reasonable doubt about whether, when the defendant slammed the door, she had reason to know that the victim could not simply use her key to open it at any time she liked. Under the circumstances, therefore, on count 2, I also conclude that the prosecution failed to carry its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant is found not guilty and is free to enjoy her lunch. I'm going to ask the scorekeepers to please conclude their scoring and to hand in their sheets. And then I will ask for brief comments from the scorekeepers, again bearing in mind that there is a second round in these same teams later in the day.
Yes. I mean, I have. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'm going to ask the scorekeepers to please share some brief remarks with you, and then I will make a few closing comments.
So the envelope?
Ms. Donovan, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Your Honor. So my comments, I think you need to understand the backdrop of my comments, and they'll be brief. So I've been in this room as a coach 11 times in the finals. And it is as stressful as it can be for a coach, equal only to the stress of the attorneys and the witnesses and your bailiff and your clerk. And I just want to tell you that both teams were just at a par that is equal to something I've seen at state and in our county. So I was very proud of all of you. Can you give your coaches and your teachers a quick round of applause? It's obvious the excellence of coaching you had and the time that you all have put into this great program. It is by far my favorite program in our entire county. Mr. Verma and Anderson, pre-trial, thought you answered questions so great when Judge Wilson asked you questions, and it shows the ability to think on your feet. Ms. Rodriguez, Ms. Rottenberg, I loved your style. You both have kind of a quiet fighter style. I like that. So I really enjoyed that. And I presume it's just how you are, and that's the best trial lawyers, are just being who you are as you do what you do. And Mr. Young, I loved how when you got an objection, you were just cool as a cucumber, my friend. I don't know, not only at your age, right, but let alone at my age. You get an objection you're not thinking about, and you were just, hey, no problem, and you just argued it, presented it, and it didn't set you back at all. That impresses me, because no matter how hard you practice, that just tells me how cool you are with the process. So thank you for letting me be here to witness the greatness of this trial. It really was a pleasure. Thank you. Good luck.
We only have 10 minutes for all of us put together, which is about 10 people. All I'm going to say is you guys were awesome. You deserve to be in the finals. It was a very close match. And good luck to whoever makes it to the state tournament.
I thought each side highlighted the facts that favored their sides very well and muted the adverse facts well. The closing arguments were excellent syntheses of the points that were favorable to your respective cases. Congratulations, wonderful job.
David, I coached for years, and my team's only made it here once. And we lost. I have to hear he was here 11 times. You guys were phenomenal. And it is stressful for the coaches and the teachers to sit out there. The other thing I used to hate was the people going on and on up here with comments. So I'm going to sit down. If you guys want any requests or feedback, we'll stay afterwards. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. This is the part, to speak to the coaches, I always hated this part because I rarely agreed with what anyone said up here. So whatever I say that's different than what your coaches say, please disregard that. Both teams were great. You both deserve to be here. The attorneys were all superb. I think we can agree that I've heard this, so I believe it because I saw it, is that it really comes down to the witnesses. And I think a lot of people spend too much time on attorneys and not enough time trying to make their witnesses into true characters. We saw one only once here today. Was a witness to my recollection who said, "Go Mustangs." That was a. But don't read anything in my comments about how I might vote. That was another mistake I make as a coach, by the way. But if you take each witness and carefully plant one moment of character like that, think about that. You really remember that witness, and I think that is what will distinguish the great teams at the state from the good teams. But best of luck, whoever goes on. It is an incredibly tight contest here today. Thank you.
All right. My goodness, one thing I have to say is both teams were so evenly matched. It was just, I spent most of my time agonizing over that fact because ultimately we have to score this. And of all the rounds that I've been involved with to date in this, I've never seen such two evenly matched teams. Each had different strengths, and it was just amazing to watch. The one thing, as far as feedback is concerned, there's only one more round, so there's not a lot of opportunity to put that into play, but I just would remind everybody, and I'm sure everyone's heard this before, watch your speed. Most of you were pretty measured, and most of you took your pauses, but a couple times, particularly with the witnesses, you got going a little fast, I couldn't catch it. Watch your volume also. If we can't hear you, we're not hearing those facts, particularly again from the witnesses. We don't know what you're saying, so we cannot, the judge cannot figure that into his ultimate verdict. But on the whole, just tremendous. This has been such a great experience. Good luck to both sides. Thank you.
Great job to both teams. This is my first time doing it for the high school age competition. I've done it for law schools. And honestly, you guys were amazing. I wouldn't even know you guys were in high school. That's how good you were. Good luck to you both in the finals. You guys are both champions. It was impossibly hard to score. Impossibly hard to score. I mean, it was minutia. So, congratulations to both of you.
So I thought both sides did a great thing. It looked to me that you guys were getting your sea legs as you were kind of getting into it, getting more relaxed. Hopefully, all your butterflies are now gone, and so when you go through it, but what David said, stay true to yourself, be who you are up there, and it'll come through. And you both guys, both teams just did a phenomenal job. Congratulations.
Excellent command of the facts, strong volume, voices, confident, poised, professional. I would be pleased to have any of you work for me as an attorney. That's how well you did. And I'm very proud of where you are and where our youth is today, given the performance I saw today. Two observations. I thought both teams displayed an excellent command of the evidence code and understood the rationale behind the evidence codes and the reasons, and responded well to the objections. I think you did very well in that regard. And one thing that I think always seems to carry a lot of weight is if you can take what the other side's doing and turn it in your favor. And I thought that the defense took the recipe for disaster, if I heard it right. I hope I'm not getting too old here. But if I heard it right, and used it in their closing argument. And that was very effective, in my opinion.
In the course of this program, the students hear again and again how impressed we are. Please understand, we're not giving you the thanks for showing up accolade in this case. I know there's a lot of TV sitcoms built around if you show up, you get an award. You guys don't show up. You show up knowing the facts, knowing the law, having learned your stagecraft, if you will. This is not a show-up award. The contributions you make are extraordinary. I made the observation before that I would be blown away by how good this is if they cancelled the rest of your schoolwork and just said, go to mock trial. But given what I know about schoolwork and high school and all the rest, everything else you guys are dealing with, that you can fit this in and be as masterful as you are is extraordinary. I echo the comments that this is a team effort. If the witnesses don't know the materials and really engage with the lawyers, it's terrible for the lawyers because the whole thing becomes wooden. Shout out to the witnesses in this case who are outstanding as always on both sides. The pre-trial presentation in this case, good Lord, I didn't know how to fashion better questions because if I made the mistake of asking a question, I got such perfect answers that I was grabbing for my next question. These amendments are not easy ones. The cases dealing with them are not easy ones. My serious kudos to the pre-trial team, including the coaches behind those preparations. Please, this afternoon, I don't think 10 witnesses should get up here and shout, "Go Mustangs." But other than that, so I will end by saying that I absolutely echo that both teams deserve to be in this final. I wish you the very best of luck for this afternoon. There cannot possibly be a loser in this room today. You are both done outstandingly well. Enjoy your lunch and good luck for this afternoon. Thank you.